The Gold King mine spill last year put the spotlight on abandoned mines throughout the western U.S. The Associated Press reported this week that the New Mexico Environment Department intends to sue the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and the owners of the Colorado mines where the spill originated. And last fall, U.S. Senators Martin Heinrich and Tom Udall stopped by New Mexico PBS to talk about current issues, including mining reform. And this week, we share with you what they had to say. First, producer Sarah Gustavus speaks with Senator Heinrich. Then correspondent Gwyneth Dolan will ask Senator Udall how he thinks Congress could address mining reform.
Senator Heinrich, thanks for sitting down with us today.
It's great to be here.
You've made several trips recently to the Navajo Nation following the Gold King mine spill. What are you hearing from tribal leaders and members right now?
There are a number of concerns that I'm hearing from people like the President and Vice President of the Navajo Nation, a lot of the council delegates out there. One is making sure that they're made whole in what was a incredibly challenging summer. Irrigation was turned off for a long time. The other is, what are we going to do to start fixing this stuff? So how are we going to clean up this enormous legacy of both uranium mines on the nation itself, and then a lot of hard rock mines upstream from the nation. So you have that whole area, the San Juans, that is really riddled with hard rock mines, a number of which are just as risky as the Gold King.
And these go back decades. There are thousands of abandoned mines across the western United States. What would it take to clean those up?
The biggest thing it takes is money, and there isn't any right now. Outside of the Superfund program, there is no sustainable way that we take the highest risk mines and begin to mitigate the issues that we saw with Gold King that have happened before on the Animas. There was a huge spill back in the 1970s. And it's my view that we need some fundamental hard rock mining reform. The law itself was written in 1872. It gives away the minerals, which belong to the American people, for no royalty whatsoever. And if you look at any other situation where something of value that belongs to all Americans is utilized for commerce, there's some sort of a royalty involved. In grazing leases, you pay a lease fee. In terms of oil and gas, there's a royalty. Coal fields, there's a royalty. But because this was passed at a time when we were in the middle of the gold rush, they literally just gave these hard rock minerals away, even when we're talking about enormous sums of money. I think it's time that we took a small percentage of that and put it back into a fund that cleans up the worst of these mines and prioritize, map out these watersheds, figure out exactly what are the mines that are the most likely to be a threat to human health and watersheds, and start cleaning them up.
What's a fair number for those royalties?
We are trying to figure that out right now, and there's a fair amount of disagreement on that, but I think we can get to a fair number. It's not my goal to punish the mining industry. My father worked in the mining industry, my grandfather worked in the mining industry, but we need to be able to clean up these abandoned mines. And this legacy, as you said, it's not just decades. Some of these mines have been there over 100 years now, and they are a severe threat when you're talking about heavy metals and acid leachate to the quality of our water. And today, in this century, there's nothing more important for our economic development than protecting our water and protecting our tourism revenues.
And since the Gold King mine spill first happened, we've heard some people come out and say the Environmental Protection Agency should be held accountable because the EPA crew are the ones who released this into the river. What's your response to that?
The EPA should be held accountable, and we are going to continue to push on the EPA to make sure that they make whole the community in southern Colorado, northern New Mexico, the Navajo Nation, eastern Arizona, who were severely impacted by this. But then we have to, in addition to that, pivot and say, how do we make sure that this is the last mine spill, not just another mine spill in a long series?
Any other reforms you'd like to see on mining?
We're looking at including some Good Samaritan mining reform as well. There are a lot of organizations that under the Clean Water Act can go in and clean up some of the less complicated mine sites. Under current law, they can end up being liable for those activities and for the mine itself, even though they didn't create the mess. And so reforming Good Samaritan laws to say that for approved projects, a Trout Unlimited or some other community organization can do some of that work would facilitate a lot of cleanup as well.
Would that be like a public-private partnership?
In many cases, it would be a public-private partnership.
Thank you so much, Senator.
Thank you.
Senator Udall, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Gwyneth. Great to be with you.
My pleasure. We're talking today about mining reforms. Senator Martin Heinrich, Representative Ben Ray Lujan, and you are together sponsoring a bill that would ask the EPA to compensate people for the damage that the spill has caused, the Gold King mine spill. It would also require EPA to monitor that site and the water quality, and it would also ask the federal government to identify other sites like that that need some help and make a list of priorities. How much is this going to cost?
Yeah, we don't know yet because we don't know how extensive the damage is. That's really to tell you the straight truth. I mean, you have a lot of farmers who were prevented from having water right at the height of the season. And I've been out in those fields and their crops died. And so they have to pull together all of the information, the cost of the seed, how much they normally would sell their agricultural products for, and come up with that. But the important thing is the Environmental Protection Agency has admitted liability. They said, we're going to pay for this. And so we really set up the procedure to allow that to move along. It's going to be taken care of out of the Judgment Act, which is where claims against the government are taken care of in the courts. And we do all the things that you just said to try to protect New Mexicans and move forward on this issue.
There's been broad agreement over the idea that the EPA needs to pay to make people whole, but there's not total agreement on some of the other elements. For example, New Mexico State Environment Secretary Ryan Flynn said he doesn't trust EPA to do this monitoring or to share the information in a transparent manner. He says the federal government should instead just help New Mexico and the coalition that Governor Martinez has put together. Why not let the state take the lead on that?
Yeah. Well, the important thing we do in the legislation is tell the EPA, you need to put the resources into monitoring. You need to make sure the state and the local governments and the tribes have the dollars and resources they need to continue testing and making sure that the water's safe. So I think there's a good balance and a good partnership between the federal government and between the state.
Now, part of the issue here is that the law that regulates mining, the Mining Act, is ancient. It's as old as these mines, older. So there are some separate proposals that would require the mining companies to be more proactive about these dangers by taking steps to protect the environment, assuring the government they have the resources to pay for cleanup if there's an accident, and to pay royalties and fees that would go into a cleanup fund. Folks before you have tried hard to reform this law, but they have never been able to defeat the mining industry and their powerful lobby. What do you think is different now?
Yeah. Well, what's different is more and more people in the West are learning about these abandoned mines. And every time we have a spill like this, like the Gold King mine spill, we raise the public consciousness. And we've taken some significant efforts in uranium mines to try to get cleanup. The Navajo Nation recently won a lawsuit against the federal government to be able to get significant dollars to go in there. We have a coal mining fund to clean up mines. And this is the last one that's hanging out there. And I just hope that people pay attention to this. They look at what happened in the Gold King spill, and they realize that we need to push the mining industry here to do the right thing. And I'm going to use those same skills I've used in legislating over the years I've been in the Congress to try to bring people together at the table. Let's not demonize the mining industry, but let's have them at the table and hear what they have to say, but let's put a strong bill in place, not a law that was there in 1872 to encourage people to come to the West and mine, which didn't take care of the environment. It didn't take care of the idea that after you went out of business, who was going to pay. I believe the polluter should pay, not the people, and that's who's paying today, the taxpayers.
And many people agree that the mining companies should pay for damage that they incur. On the other side, this is a lot of money we're talking about, and mining does provide a lot of good, high-paying jobs across the West. How can you assure people who depend on mining for their incomes that this isn't going to have such a negative impact on these companies that we're going to lose jobs?
Well, what I know is if you really analyze the amount of money you need to reclaim the areas, to protect the environment, it's a very small amount on each ton of ore. I mean, it's a penny or two. It's a small amount. That isn't going to impact a good, solid industry that's moving along and creating jobs. And we know in New Mexico we need the mining industry. We've had significant development in New Mexico, but at the same time, New Mexico passed a strong law in 1993 to make sure that there was reclamation, there was protection of the environment, and there wasn't pollution of groundwater.
Thank you so much for coming in and talking to us about this.
Thank you. Thank you.